few days ago, I was watching a Nova show on PBS. It was called the Race of the Robots, or something like that. And was watching this. It was describing a competition between, sponsored by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, for robot technology, and the sponsors had proposed a course of sort of like an obstacle course that they wanted the robot to be able to negotiate and to perform certain tasks, sort of like what would be required if it were the robot were handling some serious accident scene. And anyway, one of the teams that were put forward was a team of the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. And I do believe when they introduced that team, they showed a photo of some researchers out front, and I did believe I see Jeff's face there, because he is the senior research scientist there. Is that right?
A senior research scientist. So.
Yes. Okay.
But if it was smiling, it was probably me.
It was probably, and so he really is very well known in the artificial intelligence and robotics world. He's written a book that he wrote called Software Agents. Has become really quite of a classic in the field, and he has received several rewards that I won't take time to describe. You can see it all on the Interpreter website. It has a full biography. So without further ado, we'll turn the time over to Jeff.
Thank you so much, David. It's an honor to be introduced by David. He and I have known each other since some early days. We were together on a NASA REACT Science Council, and I have always been grateful that unknown introduction came together in that way. It's a pleasure. And David, of course, has been one of the organizers of these conferences and has just made a great contribution. Well, you see the title here. It's with apologies to some others, but I like putting these two phrases together. The future isn't what it used to be. Artificial intelligence meets natural stupidity. The phrase, the future isn't what it used to be, is often attributed to Yogi Berra, although he admitted, as one might also conclude about Elder J. Golden Kimball, that he didn't say everything he said. The same aphorism was used by scientist and science fiction author Sir Arthur C. Clarke, and later by Apple co-founder Steve Jobs. And in some talks that they gave about the very optimistic future of technology. Although I'd agree with Clarke and Jobs that there's a great and bright future ahead for technology in the future, that isn't the kind of talk I'm going to give today. More significant than the transformations that technology works upon us directly, more potent than any hallucinogenic drug in our thoughts and senses, are the mind-altering effects of our changing conceptions about the future. Arthur C. Clarke observed, quote, "Until a century ago, nobody was very interested in the future for the simple reason that, apart from natural catastrophes and wars, the future was going to be the same as the past. A man knew that the pattern of his life would be the same as his great-grandfather's as far back as anybody could remember. Well, now we know differently." The brilliant, problematic French poet and essayist Paul Valéry explained why the future isn't what it used to be in 1937. Wrote Valéry, "The future, like everything else, is no longer what it used to be. We used to consider the unknown future as a simple combination of already known things, and the new is analyzed according to its unoriginal elements. But that is ended. The rules of the game are changed at every throw. No calculation of probabilities is possible in the game. Why? Because the modern world is assuming the shape of man's mind. Man has sought in nature all the means and powers that are necessary to make the things around him as unstable, volatile, and mobile as himself, as admirable, as absurd, as disconcerting and prodigious as his own mind. If we imprint the form of our mind on the human world, the world becomes all the more unforeseeable and assumes the mind's own disorder." Happily, concludes Valéry, These prophecies are idle. I'm busy doing exactly what I explained the vanity of a few moments ago. I'm looking ahead, therefore I'm wrong. Since the far future is impossible to predict with any confidence, my burden today will be to share some candid observations about the present and near future as it has to do with technology, technologists, and society between now and, say, 2025, a little less than 10 years from now. In brief, I want to explain why I'm not convinced that a technological apocalypse is nigh at hand. I will also have some advice for the future to give in that regard. As the wise Duc de la Rochefoucauld said, old people like to give good advice since they can no longer set bad examples. First, a little personal aside. I was the next to youngest in my family. My brother Scott and I were called the little boys. We were spoiled by our older brothers and sisters, which explains a lot. My mother engendered in me a love of learning and in the gospel. My father was the first missionary and the first college graduate in his family. He lovingly spurred me along my scientific interests, providing me with a large cardboard box in the garage filled with motors, wind-up clocks, and vacuum tube electronics that I could take apart and sometimes put back together. One day at lunch during the height of the Cold War, after hearing me protest that I didn't want to eat my orange because I didn't like the taste of the bitter white stuff that stuck on after you peeled it, my dad told me that the white stuff would protect me from radiation in the case of nuclear fallout. That creative fib not only solved the immediate problem of getting me to eat my orange greedily, but also convinced me that there was a real practical value to science. One day, my older brother convinced me that if I ran fast enough, I could be upstairs and downstairs at the same time. As I recall, my efforts to find out for myself whether that was true lasted long enough to provide amusement for all the family. Though I can't say I succeeded in proving my brother's hypothesis at the time, I was pleased when I later learned enough about quantum mechanics to vindicate my earlier failed experiments. I mention all this to convince you that my reflections today come out of a lifetime of watching how scientists and technologists work, sharing from personal experience both their inspiring dreams and their hopeless fantasies. As David mentioned, my day job is at the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, or IHMC for short. At IHMC, I feel very fortunate to work among researchers who are among the best in the world in their areas of specialty. And I will mention, yes, that one of our most exciting moments in 2015 was during the final phase of the DARPA Robotics Challenge. There, the IHMC walked away with $1 million check and top honors among all participating American universities and research institutions, and all but one international competitor. Researchers at IHMC are passionate about science and technology. By the way, this is the same place I met Brother Guy some years ago at IHMC in Pensacola, so I'm very pleased that that happened too. However, and we share, I think, some of the same feelings, I felt very much at home with his descriptions about the way science and scientists work. For the next few minutes, though, I'd like to share a few of the lessons I've learned, not about science and technology itself, but rather about scientists and technologists. If you understand scientists and technologists, you'll be able to do a pretty good job in analyzing the news about science and technology, even if you don't understand the science and technology itself. One thing I've learned about technologists is that they tend to be incurable optimists. I think that's a little bit more than the scientists, who tend to be a little more careful. For instance, consider the original caption on this photograph from the 1930s, quote, "This steel man is near enough to accuracy to explain the physiology of the human frame," end of quote. The two students at left are no doubt counting the number of ribs to make sure they are all there. This reminds me of a question I once heard posed about why young primary children are often asked to draw pictures of their fathers to show them on Father's Day. The answer? Because the fathers want to know what they really look like. When you look at the ups and downs of the lives of scientists and technologists, as shown here, it becomes understandable why they might suffer for incurable optimism, even when the face of reality glares at them fiercely between the eyes. As is often expressed with unfeigned sympathy, there goes another beautiful theory about to be murdered by a brutal gang of facts. The professional lives of researchers are inherently unstable. In many cases, their stubborn, unreasonable optimism gives them courage to engage in tedious and often discouraging work every day. The stress of scientists and technology is not merely a stress of the first order, like the kind that stems from high pressure and overwork, but also a stress of the second order, which is something more existential in nature. Many researchers are passionate about the potential of their contributions, wanting to make a difference in the important contemporary problems such as health, poverty, food production, and quality of life. Their stress is much like the struggling artist or someone in the early uncertain stages of a romantic relationship who really want it to work but lacks a clear model of how. It is not just a matter of bulldozing one way to success by working incredibly hard or becoming more and more sure through experience about which path to take, but rather about the uncertainty of whether the paths and the destinations are even real. And then if it wasn't enough to be grappling with uncertainties relating to the scientific viability of the work, researchers usually have to be concerned with just as deeply with the dizzyingly frequent changes in levels of public interest in the relevant ideas, which in turn drive the ups and down trends of highly competitive funding in their lines of investigation. Each year, the Gartner Group publishes an annual update to their hype cycle. The curve illustrates how the most successful emerging technologies rapidly trend upward toward a peak of inflated expectations before suddenly dropping down into a trough of disillusionment. Only relatively few such technologies sustain their popularity long enough to progress through a gradual slope of enlightenment and on to a plateau of productivity. Bad timing with respect to the hype cycle can be more destructive than the odds of success in executing a line of research than having a bad idea to begin with. The truth of this claim is evident in the sheer volume of bad ideas that are funded as soon as a given topic approaches the peak of the hype cycle. This brings us to our first example, which sits at the very top of the 2015 Gartner Hype Cycle update, self-driving cars. This is the most easily recognized self-driving car today, the Google Koala prototype, publicly unveiled, I think it was September of last year. The image tells you about the features of the Google car, but it does not tell you what features of an ordinary car have been removed, namely the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brake pedal. It is a specific example of the incurable optimism of technologists. Success in fielding large numbers of general-purpose driving cars, as opposed to cars that operate in a specific, well-constrained niche, certain places around Disneyland, for example, depends on solving several difficult problems. The biggest challenges are not in the basics of autonomous driving, getting from A to B. The devil is in the myriad details of unexpected events that can occur while driving. My colleague on the Nissan Science Advisory Council, Donald Norman, says it this way, quote, "We know two things about unexpected events. First, they always occur. And second, when they do occur, they are always unexpected." End of quote. The California Driving Authority is trying to do something about this problem. It has recently implemented new rules whereby autonomous vehicles are required, quote, to have means whereby a person sitting in the car could intervene at any time if the technology fails, end of quote. Sound like a good idea? Right. Here's the rub. What Don Norman calls, I need to go back here, sorry. Tapped on too many times. There. Okay. What Norman calls halfway automation, or what other researchers sometimes call the handoff problem. In defense of Google's apprehensions, halfway automation is sometimes a much bigger problem and much more dangerous than full automation. I once argued, writes Norman, that the current state of automation was fundamentally unsound because it was in the dangerous middle ground, neither fully automated nor fully manual. Either have no automation or full automation, I argued, but what we have today is halfway automation. Even worse, the system takes over when the going is easy and gives up, usually without any warning, when the going gets tough. Just the reverse of what you'd really want. I fear, continues Norman, that while the partial automation of driving will lead to fewer accidents, the accidents that do happen will be greater in magnitude, involve more cars, and exact a higher toll. Something to watch for. The incurable optimism of researchers must be handled with extreme deftness and skill by traditional auto company CEOs. This is not only because they need to temper public expectations, but also many are longing for partnerships with technology companies such as Google and Apple. On January 7th, 2016, the day after our IH&C research team participated with our colleagues at NASA and Nissan in a successful demonstration of autonomous driving technologies, the New York Times reported Nissan chairman and CEO Carlos Ghosn's announcement that the company, quote, would introduce 10 new autonomous vehicles in the next 4 years. They don't always consult with the engineers and scientists when they make these announcements. Elon Musk, the chief executive of Tesla, upped the ante. In a conference call with reporters, he asserted that the so-called autopilot feature introduced in the Tesla Model S last fall was probably better than a person right now. Mr. Musk also said that within a year or two, it would be technically feasible to summon a Tesla from the opposite side of the country. But, continued the Times, there is a growing gap between what these executives are saying and what most people think when they hear executives or scientists describing driverless cars. What Mr. Musk and Mr. Ghosn are describing, cross-country driving hyperbole aside, are cars with advanced capabilities that can help drive or even take over in tricky situations like parallel parking on a busy street. And the Times, reporting truthfully this time at least, truly autonomous cars that can do all the work, like the bubble-shaped vehicles Google has been testing near its Silicon Valley campus, are still at least a decade away from ferrying people around town. So use that as your lens to interpret the news when you hear it. Now I'd like to say a few words about the most incredible example today, the incurable optimism of researchers, namely the building of powerful brains. Tremendous progress in our imaginings about powerful brains has taken place in my lifetime. When I was a child, it was too far-fetched to think that anyone could actually build a brain. So the best that science fiction could offer us was to help us imagine a real human brain kept alive in a jar and tethered with wires that was bent on either controlling or destroying the world. Thanks to the broadening of our imaginations in the computer age, we've substituted the outmoded idea of a real brain in a jar with two new and improved substitutes that become the subject of countless blockbuster movies. One, the omniscient supercomputer, a completely artificial brain, and two, the omniscient mind, a natural human brain that has been uploaded to a network of supercomputers. Both of these new options for what Nick Bostrom calls superintelligence, and a few others besides, are being hotly pursued by scientists and technologists. As the omniscient supercomputer, the current frontrunner is IBM Watson, which shares conceptual genes with Arthur C. Clarke's HAL 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey, which you all remember. The disappointment of IBM, to their disappointment, Watson has not taken off with the speed they initially hoped since the public debut on Jeopardy, remember that, in 2011. Indeed, Jeopardy has been the only application for Watson that has made much of a splash with the public. IBM's website currently lists only a few dozen small company application partners, and a February 2016 article I picked up last week touts with unabashed optimism, quote, future potential, much more than it parades details of its current successes over the last 5 years. As a super smart search engine, a capability for complex classification or diagnosis problems, or a natural language-based analytic assistant, it has some potential. As a superintelligence that matches the ambitions of HAL, I predict it will continue to fall short for the foreseeable future. The top researchers at IBM must already know this, though their sales and marketing folks still seem to be in denial. Another kind of, I forgot to show that picture. There's Watson for you. Another kind of alternative was introduced in a series of books by Ray Kurzweil, the most well-known of modern-day transhumanists. He's achieved notoriety for his technology predictions, which he claims to have been accurate 86 to 95% of the time. However, the discrepancies between his self-assessments and the assessments of others of his accuracy resemble the difference between Donald Trump's claims about Trump University and the claims of everyone else. As one critic concludes, on close examination, Kurzweil's clearest and most successful predictions often lack originality or profundity, and most of his predictions come with so many loopholes that they border on the unfalsifiable. In Kurzweil's defense, other experts fare equally poorly in their predictions about the future of AI, differing little from the opinions of non-experts in what they say or how accurate they are. For example, this graph shows experts and non-experts' median estimates for when human-level AI will appear, graphed against the data prediction. The prediction of both experts and non-experts are all over the map. Sorry about that. There you have it. Message should be clear. Okay, new slide. Notably, there is a strong tendency to predict AI within 15 to 25 years, regardless of when the prediction is made. In Kurzweil's 2005 book, The Singularity is Near, When Humans Transcend Biology, he predicts a future where, in fusing themselves with machines, humans can leave the flesh behind. In the meantime, setting out a plan of diet, exercise, vitamin supplementation, and preventive medical care, he believes, enhance longevity to the point where technology can overcome mortality. In other words, Kurzweil is doing everything he can to live long enough in mortality so that he can make himself immortal through technology. Overall, John Gray sees Kurzweil's program as being best understood as a version of process theology. It is not essentially different from Gorky's fantasy of humans evolving to become pure thought, the virtue without a body. The virtual afterlife is a high-tech variant of the spiritualist Summerland, while accelerated evolution in cyberspace is an updated version of Meyer's Victorian dream of progress in the afterworld. But apart from the philosophical and theological overtones, including for the LDS believers, the question about how the spirit and mind and body relate, as we heard from Jim Faulkner today, what can be said about the scientific feasibility of uploading our physical brains to a computer? There's been some credible thinking on this topic, as well as some very unsound proposals, but nearly every expert on the topic agrees that the many remaining challenges would not be overcome in the near future. Before you can upload a brain, you need to be able to model it, and most of the focus to date has been on replicating structure, ignoring the equally or perhaps more daunting challenge of replicating the complex details of functions and processes. The brain is more than just a bag of poorly modeled neurons. As part of a 2008 National Academy study of the future of cognitive neuroscience and related technologies, I wrote the following summary of our consensus on the topic. Quote, despite the impressive increases in high-end computing, there does not seem to exist either an adequate and detailed understanding of how modeling the human brain can be done, or a complete model of how the brain interacts with complex regulatory and monitoring systems throughout the body. These and other difficulties make it highly unlikely that within the next 2 decades, anyone could build a neuropsychologically plausible model of the whole brain and its array of specialized and general purpose higher cognitive functions. Well, one area that's fraught with momentous consequences is the prospect of the proliferation of autonomous weapons, one of the many topics that I explored in depth as a member of the 2015 Defense Science Board Summer Study on Autonomy. Because the public version of the study has not yet been released, I can't comment on details or share the committee's consensus. However, I want to share my personal thoughts and concerns about the future development and deployment of weapons with autonomous capabilities in both the cyber and physical domains by adversaries who are not constrained by the principles and ethics that ought to govern U.S. policies in this arena. As an aside, over the last 15 years, my research group has spent significant effort on technological solutions to the problems of policy-based governance of intelligent systems in the spirit of Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. We call our policy services framework chaos. Unlike nuclear weapons deployed in World War II, the proliferation of autonomous weapons would not be constrained by a given nation's ability to perform sophisticated refinement of rare elements, such as nuclear raw material, but rather is being helped along rapidly by the virtually unlimited capacity for just about anyone to share and duplicate the needed software using worldwide computer networks. Unlike nuclear weapons, the development and proliferation of intelligent weaponry cannot be easily monitored or banned. There is no need to solve the long-term AI problem of general intelligence in order to develop early generations of such weapons. Only the development of limited scope autonomous capabilities that are dedicated to specific purposes. Just to prove that others besides researchers can entertain wild speculations, at the initial meeting of a National Academy study, a group of us were told that one of the questions we needed to explore was whether it would be possible to develop an autonomous weapon that could fire into a crowd and only hit people with hostile thoughts. Without even entering into the staggering legal and ethical implications of developing such a weapon, our committee implicitly answered this question on the pure grounds of common sense. Today, we hardly know how to build a good automatic lie detector, let alone being able to recognize a range of specific psychological states for an unknown individuals in an uncontrolled environment. And, thank heavens, it's highly unlikely that the needed breakthroughs will happen anytime in the next few decades. You're safe for now. Cyber warfare is one of the most underappreciated threats of the modern age. Everything in our economy, infrastructure, and personal lives would come to a grinding halt were such threats carried out at a large scale. This video, using simulated data, is it working? Okay, yeah. Shows one of the approaches our research team developed in response to a government request to be able to visualize the entire internet at once and understand what analysts should be paying attention to. You can see a projection of a world map at the top with various patterns of attack moving downward toward the company network at the bottom, belonging to a specific victim and its primary financial institution. While usually rejecting the prospects of an AI explosion, singularity, or apocalypse such as those popularized in the media, researchers in artificial intelligence have been thinking more seriously of late about the future of AI. As a result, there have been a recent proliferation of research institutions, studies, articles, books, blogs, and open letters of concern to help assure that both the short and long-term trajectories of AI research will follow directions that are both safe and beneficial to society. Now, our brief tour of AI must come to an end. It's been exciting for me to over the years to see many of our breakthroughs we used to call artificial intelligence become assimilated as ordinary ho-hum parts of mainstream computer science and engineering. As far as the potential benefits of science and technology, I share much of the optimism of President Gordon B. Hinckley, who said, quote, "The 20th century has been the best of all centuries. The fruits of science have been manifest everywhere. This is an age of greater understanding and knowledge. This has been an age of enlightenment. The miracles of modern medicine, of travel, of communication are almost beyond belief," end of quote. I believe that the fruits of science and technology are divine gifts to which it is appropriate to apply the observation given in Doctrine and Covenants 59:20, quote, "And it pleaseth God that he hath given all these things unto man. For unto this end were they made to be used, with judgment, not to excess, neither by extortion." Do I ever lose sleep over the future of artificial intelligence? Only rarely, and that's usually when I'm wrestling over a solution to some interesting problem. That's not to say that I don't sometimes lose sleep over the future in general, for related reasons that are best illustrated by Boyd Peterson's account of an incident involving the late Hugh Nibley. Quote, this is a quote from Boyd's biography of Nibley. "One day in the early 1950s, Hugh Nibley's teaching assistant, Curtis Wright, found Hugh leaning over his desk, reading from the Book of Mormon and laughing. Wright asked Hugh Nibley what was so funny, and he responded that he discovered an error in the Book of Mormon. "You did, huh?" Wright asked. "That's interesting. Let me see it." Hugh handed the scriptures over to Wright and pointed him to Alma 42:10, which says that humans are carnal, sensual, and devilish by nature. Wright read the passage and demanded, "Well, what's the matter with that?" Wright was beginning to think that Hugh might be ridiculing the Book of Mormon. "So I got a little defensive," says Wright. Unable to conceal his contempt, Wright demanded, "How's it a mistake?" Nibley responded, "Well, look at Alma. He says that mankind is carnal, sensual, and devilish by nature, and he should have said that they were carnal, sensual, devilish, and stupid." No, I don't worry too much about the future of artificial intelligence, but I do over the consequences of natural stupidity. When artificial intelligence meets natural stupidity, unfortunate things can happen. May God grant that we may read and understand the fine print in the hype cycles, discern the designs which do and will exist in the hearts of conspiring men in the last days, and most important of all, rely on divine wisdom to overcome our natural stupidity is my prayer. Thank you. Oh, will there ever be such a thing as a completely autonomous system? Well, you know, I direct you to my website, jeffreyandbradshaw.com, because we have an article just for whoever asks this question. It's called The 7 Deadly Myths of Autonomous Systems. And this companion article is The 7 Cardinal Virtues of Human Agent Robot Teamwork. So the quick answer to this is that imagine you could have a machine that was totally autonomous. Imagine you had an autonomous robot that was, oh, there's my son Samuel. Hi, Samuel. That was your coworker on things, and it had no ability, because it was autonomous, to really work as a teammate, to work as to have that interdependence with other people in its environment, to work with and for people. It would be completely useless. So I'd say a completely autonomous system in the sense of not having relying and creating a relationship of interdependence with other machines and people probably has very little value. Anyway, go to that myths of autonomous systems, and we say our answer is no. Are what we describe by Joseph Smith, light and intelligence, one and the same? We know that light is generated by the movement of electronics and force and speed in which they flow. Intelligence may be the same as this movement. Well, you should have been at the conference last year. We talked about cosmos, earth, and man. I'm going to defer that and say get a copy of the proceedings of the first book, and you'll see our views on that. But I would just say that I believe that the light that's being talked about in the scriptures is of a different nature than the kind of light we find in nature. You are out on the bleeding edge of technology, so somebody found out I'm crazy. Are you ever astonished by any actual technological accomplishments? Actually, to tell you the truth, I'm usually more astonished and a little bit discouraged by how slow things seem to go. You know, we'll just look at something so simple as Wi-Fi, right? When it first came on board, didn't we think that within 10 years, every airport and everywhere we'd have Wi-Fi for free? And now we still don't have it. It's the same way with all the technologies. When I started the career, I had all kinds of ideas about how quickly things were going to come. We worked in space for a long time, and it was subject to the hype cycles and funding cycles, and it's really unlikely that in our lifetimes we'll see anybody ever go to the planets, although I hope I'm wrong on that one. So my greatest astonishments are sometimes that things don't go faster than they do, and maybe that's just God watching over us. Thank you.